Hello and welcome back to the Handstandcast with me, Emmet Lewis, and my co-host Mikael Christiansen. How are things going, Mikael?
What can I say? Been watching documentary about a French cult all morning, which was fascinating. If any of you listening want to see really fucked up shit, look up the cult of Thierry Tilly, I think his name is, French guy who basically manipulated an entire family for a decade, ruining them both psychologically and financially. Absolutely insane. So that's what I've been doing. Other than that, can't complain. How about you?
I don't know. I've been listening to you talk about a cult and deciding I need to set one up. It's much easier than anything else. So, anyone, if you would like to join my cult, just DM me on Instagram and I'll tell you how to get in. DM me your bank account and we'll start there. Show your commitment to the cult. But,
Also, just like give up all sense of what's it called? Personal autonomy. Very important. That is mine.
yeah. Why need personal autonomy? It just simplifies the world to hand it over to the guru.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Very efficient.
Yeah, very efficient setup. I think we should start a handstand cult. The cult of the inverted
I
brain.
mean, isn't that really what we have done?
Yeah, we
Sitting
kinda-
here talking to the masses with all the important things that you need to know.
I know. I just feel like I don't get enough people giving me their life savings to justify it, though.
Yeah, that's
So,
a good point.
yeah. I know what people are thinking, but like, if you feel like liquidating all your assets and giving them to my organization,
The organization.
the organization, sorry, not my
But like,
organization.
because remember, like this entire Handstand Factory thing is just a ploy. It's just kind of a thing. Like we'll give you kind of the real information about how the world actually works. Like later on,
Yeah.
that's when you buy our like super special program that's hidden on the website, but it's only for the real initiates.
Yeah,
And then like you'll learn about like the mysteries of the universe.
yeah. We'll definitely get your operating Tatons up.
Yep, very important.
Yeah. I think that's all kind of weird. It's kind of weird, sorry, to segue onto the cult thing, that how many cults actually grow up in the whole fitness industry that you kind of see.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's kind of very weird that I've seen it so much over the years where like there's just something about people who work in the general fitness industry and pyramid schemes, and then pyramid schemes that transition to cults, that they're mad for them. Like everything from like,
Yeah.
the simple stuff of like supplements like Keto OS, or what are supplements like Juice Plus, or fasting, or prolonged fasting, or all these kind of multi-level marketing kind of fitness scams. But then a lot of them, if they kind of last long enough, they kind of transition into a cult. So then you get
Yeah.
I'm not probably going to name them so I don't get my house burnt out, but there's a few of them out there. And it is kind of
Definitely.
like, yeah,
I was following this one for a while, which I will not name it, but holy fucking shit, there was a lot of like it started coming out like YouTube videos about how to what was it? It started going into kind of government conspiracies and all kinds of stuff, and it just started with some dude doing some weird ass shit with a rubber band. So it's kind of but like I do think that like maybe the correlation comes from I mean you do get authority once you are in a certain position of being kind of even just being a trainer, you are in a position of authority, and then like when you get enough of that and you have a larger group, you start being kind of influencing their choices to a significant degree. And I think like mainly is that like to like that type of position existing will attract people who want to, or like who are susceptible to doing that to people.
Yeah.
So I think that like kind of the guru mindset will inevitably lead people into those types of situations, and fitness has a lot of them.
yeah, it's definitely, it's weird. It's all very weird business. So, before we go deeper on this one, I think we really need to start a second cast. Everyone,
Yeah,
just
we-
let
we
us
need
know
to
if
start,
you'd
like-
listen, like, if to us rambling on, like, other kind of meta topics, and we might do it that are
Yeah,
not
I
handstand
mean,
related.
you can hear us. This is basically where we're going to every single time. And then we're like, oh, this is about handstands. It's not about like some weird obscure shit that we saw on YouTube.
Yeah.
But what are we talking about
That's what
today?
we're talking about. Today, we are going to talk about common mistakes in handstands, presses, one arms, I suppose. Everything, really. Just kind of what we can come up with over the course of the hour. I think it's one of those things where like there's always this idea I feel with mistakes, or what people would call a mistake is it a mistake or is it just something done out of context? Like for me, a handstand, if I was to label it as like, there's only really one mistake. There's like what I intended to do and what actually happened. And
Good point.
if what I intended to do is what actually happened, or my translation of a verbal or visual instruction translated into a close approximation of what I want to do, then it's not really a mistake, but obviously there's a process of refinement. But then the other one is like, oh, I tried to do something and then my approximation of that something was just totally wrong. For me, that's basically the only mistake in terms of thing. It's like, oh, what I wanted to do versus what I then. But then this is where the outside eye comes in. It's like, oh, someone wanted to do, say, X. They wanted to hold their handstand with shoulders too open, and that's what they wanted to do. And then Coach B comes along and goes, you need to close your shoulders, brah. And it's like, well, actually, maybe they didn't. Maybe this is what they want. Maybe they made this choice. So this is kind of one of those things that I'd qualify as a lot of, in terms of thinking of mistakes and thinking of how they happen, is to think of like, what was the person actually trying to do?
Yeah.
And was it
yeah,
sorry.
No, I think it's a good place to start such a discussion, because like if you use that terminology, like a close approximation, because that is what it is going to be anyway, and like even when you can do something, what you're trying to do is like make it as close a representation to this kind of mental image you have of the figure or the kind of position or whatever you want to do, or like you're trying to kind of replicate that. And like the more times you've done it, the easier it is for you, the closer that approximation will be, and in the end it'll be the same every single time because it's just such second nature. But like it's important then, like through people's learning, or like through anyone's learning process, that like what at one stage of learning is basically working on what you're like. It's basically working, it's nothing else. Like you're trying and you're calibrating, and through the calibration you'll have to miss the target, but then as you are getting really good at this task, and like a classic mistake, I would say more so, I think most mistakes happen actually more methodologically than technically. And I think this is it's a kind of diffuse distinction, and I think it's easy to say that technique is methodology, but it really isn't, because technique is trying to do something in a specific way, whereas the methodology is like how do you set the boundary conditions for how you do this thing. And I think that a very classic mistake, and something I would call a mistake, is like, let's say for example someone's trying to learn to kick up to handstand, and we've talked about this before. So I come in, I'm going to learn how to kick up to handstand. I'm pretty excited. I think this is kind of fun. So I try to kick up. It doesn't work on the first attempt. So I just try again and again and again and again. And I've tried 15 to 20 times without resting in between. And if you then think a step back, it's like, hey, what's the likelihood that I'm just going to hit like kick up number 14 when I missed it on 1 to 5, where I had energy, where I was more focused? You start getting more and more drained, but you just keep trying because that is you don't have like a methodological way of thinking. That might be a mistake in terms of like, hey, take a breather, think about what happened here. Okay, I'm just gonna rest and just make sure my shoulders are not burning anymore. Then I try again. So I think there's quite a lot of kind of room for discussing the concept of the mistake.
Yeah, I think that's kind of, I suppose, the classic mistake of not having a plan, I suppose, or not having, it's not even a plan, I suppose, a map of what your training is going to do, or how the training should be performed, or what you're going to attempt. This is kind of one of those things that, like, obviously handstands can be quite an analytical and mental skill, but it is analyzing what you did, and then how it happened, and can you spot the mistake. Sometimes when you're beginning, you obviously can't spot the mistake, you don't know what's going on. You have to build up a sensory map and a kind of a visual confirmation of your sensory map, and then go, oh, actually, I need to do this instead, or I need to do that. Obviously, there's that kind of thing as well, but having a kind of game plan of like, how do I pace myself, and not knowing about pace myself. Oh, that kind of goes, oh, when do I know, when should I stop? That's always an important one, I feel. Just in that one, it's like, oh, when do I stop and assess myself?
Yeah.
You know?
Or when do you even like when do you start as well is another good
Yeah.
example. Like it's I think it's again a classic one when you're like new and enthusiastic, and particularly if you don't know much about the subject matter, you'll try a bunch of things.
Yeah.
Whereas like where there is a lot of good things to be said about attempting intuitively. Like I've seen this a lot at like the gym I've been training. Like there are these acro mats down there. They're pretty soft. You don't want to handstand on them. And everyone I see training handstand, they train on those mats. Like this is a mistake, I would say. Like
Yeah.
there's unless they're doing a very specific gymnastics related training, then these mats are not helping whatsoever. And every single one are trying to do wall handstands on the mat instead of on the hard floor. And I understand why. I understand the intuitive thinking, but it's just not better for your wrist at all. It's worse, and you're gonna learn less. And also, I see people there who come in and like they cannot handstand, and they have like zero understanding of the handstand, and like I see them lean and try to press, and obviously nothing is happening. They lean forwards and then they kind of do like a bunny hop, and then they just do like a half snake up and they fall out of it. And this is kind of like, okay, where's your starting point? Is what you're working on, where is that in relation to your current ability level? And of course, as with everything, like it's unless you know anything, it's hard to know to have then a sensible idea of, okay, is there any point to try this? And I kind of like to equate it to mathematics sometimes. I suck at maths, and that's the reason why I like to use it, because if you give me an equation, like I don't remember how to solve even the basic shit that I did in school. I haven't done that for 20 years. And then like I sit there and I look at the thing and I'm like, okay, I don't know where to start. So there's just no point for me trying to solve this. But whereas like with skills where you can try, and you will get kind of a sensation that you're doing something, because with mathematics, like you just sit and you look at it and it's like, okay, I cannot do anything because I just don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Whereas with the handstand, you put your hands on the floor and you try to do something, and it might feel as if something is happening, but to the experienced eye, you're just like, well, you can try this for 17 years and it'll give you very little tangible progress. Whereas if you did these three things for 6 months, you could start doing this thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of getting a bit more into practice, but I suppose just on the maths thing, there's a very one of the guys on the masters I've done he's like made a fortune setting up some TV station, but his background was maths, and he was now just kind of cruised being rich and teaching, because he really liked teaching. And he wanted to set up an after school program focused on teaching maths in a better method, because he was just kind of thought maths wasn't taught well. And his whole point on maths was like, he got loads of people in. He had a few test groups running. It was quite successful, but he changed country, so I don't know what's going on. But his thing was like, okay, first lesson. Okay, who's good at maths? No one's there good in an after-school program for maths who's good at maths, obviously, because they need extra curriculum. And then he was like, oh, no one. Do you think you're good at maths? Or girls good at maths? Like trying to get all these kind of things. And then he just swapped it over. And was like, who can play an instrument? And everyone puts their hand up or whatever. A select group of people who can play an instrument. I was like, were you good at guitar on day one, or did you suck at it? How did you get better? Practice. What did you need to have? Oh, some methods of breaking things down simpler. Oh, well, how did you learn to play? I'd done some scales. Oh, once you could do some scales. Oh, you had all the skills. Oh, then you put them into practice. So it's that kind of thing. And then he's like, maths is the exact same thing. You just need to know the skills. Then you need to put them into practice, and then you just make them harder and harder. So that was his way of teaching maths as a kind of skill. This is high school level maths, obviously. So teaching it as a skill, teaching some of the logic, and then teaching it as a skill. So it's kind of interesting. So we're kind of off common mistakes with just kind of it is interesting that you can apply this kind of idea of like, oh, let's break things down into something simpler and then just grind it out till you get good at it.
Mm.
Ah,
Yeah,
yeah,
and like I mean, if looking at kind of then it's not, yeah, now we kind of did discuss more methodological mistakes, and if you look at kind of technical ones, and we go from the framework that you know what you're trying to do, and but you are perhaps not able to do it well enough yet. And you kind of like, because in there, yes, there is like there is a degree of difference, and like it all of this kind of converges, so it's difficult to always separate kind of methodology from technique and so on. But for example, I think a good example I thought of now was back when I was doing breaking. I was one of the few people that could do like a straight arm press, because like that's how my shoulders would the most easily operate for some
yeah,
reason. So I could do the straight arm press, and then some, and the others, or not all, but many of them, when they would try a press, because I mean they were breakers, they were very strong, so they would just lean forwards, they'd bend their arms quite significantly, like almost to 90 degrees, so they could access kind of their strength from freezes and stuff. They'd
yeah,
lift their legs up, and then they'll straighten their arms. And like the bending of the arms were so severe that like it's literally a very pronounced bent arm press,
yeah,
and that is kind of like it's a good example, because it's a point where both technical and methodological mistakes kind of converge, because such a person, if they work in that manner, the arm bending would be so severe that like there would be practically no way for them to start at the bottom of a press, leaning forwards and getting all the weight into their hands without bending the arms. Like they would be so dominant in this bent arm position and have so little to go with in the straight arm position. So that would be what they all like. That would be the solution to the problem always, and it
yeah,
would be a mistake that would be extremely hard to break out of by just trying to do the task. Whereas these guys, they would like, what they would be better off with, if I'd known the kind of the methods back then, was to do like start in handstand, do straight arm negatives as far as they could, or kind of stomach to
yeah,
wall straight arm negatives and so on, because then you can get work done on the specific thing. Whereas on the other hand, like I have taught people that have kind of a micro bend in their press in the beginning, and then like give them 2 months and the arms are perfectly straight, because the mechanics of what they were doing was so similar
yeah,
to the task that we were trying to do. So like there's a spectrum there that's important.
yeah. That's the kind of thing. I suppose there's two mistakes we kind of touched on here that I think are important to kind of formalize. Is we have the mistake of grinding too much and not grinding enough,
Mm.
to put it down. So one of them, in terms of those who don't play video games, grinding is when you're trying to level up and you just repeat the same task over and over again. So
Mm.
we have, in the original example Mikael used, that the person just keeps kicking up, keeps kicking up. So they're grinding too much. They haven't really got the thing. On the other side, there's a certain point when like you understand the concept and what you have to do in the kick up, but it's not right, or it's not consistent, or it still looks like shit. Then you just have to grind, but you will have to selectively grind. That I'll be working on one focus. I'll be like, okay, I'm going to get my knee locked on one of my legs. Okay, I'll grind that till I have it. Okay, I have that installed. Then I'll go on. So there's kind of, and you do get personality types. You do get like people, who will just grind, who will just like, you say, do 100 kick-ups. They've never done a kick-up before and they'll attempt it.
Mm.
Not waving the finger at any CrossFitters or anything. But that kind of, the mentality is in different kind of aspects of things. And then you get other people who will need to analytically dissect every single repetition.
Mm.
And then every repetition is probably a little different. So then it's like an infinite loop of dissecting.
Mm.
And then sometimes like these are kind of the common mistakes. There has to be you have to grind a certain amount, and you have to also analyze a certain amount, but you don't want to do too much of either.
Yeah.
Or you want to know when to grind and when not to grind.
Mm. And actually, like, just a little digression on this, I would say to any of you motherfuckers listening, if you know that you have a tendency to be either just try a million times, or be the person that films every single attempt and analyzes every single one of them. Try the opposite for a period of time, because it might put you outside of what you're used to. It might be useful. But yeah, I think this is a very important thing, because like we need the repetition on anything we do to get a ton of, or like to get good at it. And I remember like an acrobat friend of mine. He's a really good acrobat, and he's a great musician. And I asked him like, yeah, damn, you got really good at playing instruments and producing music and singing. And he's like, yeah, but you know, like it's really easy to learn. I'm like, oh yeah, maybe. But how so? He says, oh, but because you don't get tired, you can just keep on trying for 8 hours a day if you want. And I was like, okay, makes sense, because his mindset was of the type that like he had learned all these acrobatics by rigorous practice, of course technical too, but by doing it a ton of times. But the limitation, like the limit of how many times you can do like a complex acrobatic combination per session, is rather limited compared to the amount of times he can practice a grip on his ukulele, for example.
Yeah.
So you need both of these kind of aspects. But I think that to take some like specific examples, like just maybe starting from the ground up. I think that like starting very basic on like, okay, I have never been on my hands before. I'm a bit uncertain to how this process works. I think the first mistake is just doing zero research, because it's going to get you not that far in a very long time. So you can like starting out by getting some sort of overview what this means is good. Whereas the other mistake will be you buy all the programs you could ever find on internet and you read every single resource and you do nothing because you're way too busy just trying to understand to death the entire thing, because you're not going to get good just from doing that. And then like,
it's also you just don't have the discernment as well to understand what's good advice, what's bad advice, that kind of thing. There does need to be like even a bad tutorial if it's by someone who's kind of competent and just lays out something, gives you something to try for quite a while, and then you can go back and try something else.
Yeah, and most people this day and age will tell you that like, it's good to be able to do a stomach to wall handstand with your shoulders elevated. And yes, if you cannot hold your body up in this position comfortably so for maybe 20 to 30 seconds, then well, you are not missing out by becoming able to do so. So I think starting to do balancing practice too early on is something that is also just like it's going to waste a lot of your time, because you're not getting time under tension. You do not have the tools to do any balancing yet. So like not preparing the body and getting ready for the various tasks, I think is like it's a very common occurrence. And this is also why like I like to kind of think of hand balancing as these kind of oscillating phases when you're learning. Like you build yourself able to like you make your body able to hold yourself up well. You make your fingers and your forearms conditioned to be able to grip the floor well, and you build up these capacities. Then you go over from this conditioning perspective to you learn to balance a little bit with this new framework of control you've built. You get some balance. Okay, hey, I can stand for 10 seconds. I want to stand for 30. Perhaps it's time for another conditioning phase where you work specifically on staying for longer. Then, okay, you can stay longer. You want to train more in technical aspects again. So like it's possible to go back and forth between this. And I think, it can also be a mistake to just like stay in one forever. Like you only work on highly technically very difficult stuff. Or you're just like, oh, I must do the 5 sets of 2 minute handstand holds by the wall. I'm like, why?
Yeah, it's you kind of nailed it there. Once again, all our mistakes kind of have two poles. We have the mistake of over and under preparing the body. So we have the mistake of over preparing the body on certain things. So you have the mistake of not preparing the body to do a decent amount of work. So that's our general kind of handstand fitness capacity. But then the other mistake would be over focusing on things. The classic of like 2 minute chest to wall handstands before free balancing. and then you try and free balance, you just can't do it. Or the other one, 2 minutes, like I must do, I don't know, a 3 minute handstand before doing a one arm, or these kind of things, or I must be able to do a 90-second dish hold before I try a chest to wall hold. Over focusing, all these things are kind of useful, and it's good to be able to do them, but they can be taken out of context, or certain aspects of the physical preparation can be overemphasized. And then you can go, what's the classic one? It's kind of dropped off. Maybe it's still popular in the kind of movement circles of like, you have to be able to do X amount of first knuckle push-ups in a full body plank before you can balance a one arm.
Oh, I remember when that became a thing, and everyone was like, you need to be able to do that to do a handstand properly, and wrists and stuff. I can't do one still. Never worked on that shit. I can't do it. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. What is it? Yeah. And yeah, maybe that's why you can't handstand.
Yeah. But actually, like one example that I thought to take up here in terms of this this oscillation and this like levels of readiness before you do things is an example that I have right now in terms of my my shoulder injury recovery, which is now at like the best stage it's been for over a year, which is really good. I'm very excited about how it's going.
Yeah.
But what I found here last week is that my endurance is in the garbage, which is it's not surprising, but I've always, like, my endurance for the last 10 years, I've never really worked on one arm endurance or anything, but it's been at like an acceptable and kind of, I've had a common ability to stay up for like 3 to 4 minutes depending on like how much energy I have, maybe more so if I'm fresh. But that's been kind of like a basic staple that like, okay, I can just go back and forth on the floor, do straddle one arms for a while, and I'll start falling due to tiredness, like when I start really starting to shake. But I tried here last Friday and I was like, holy fuck, I'm struggling after a minute and a half. And like, of course, looking back, it makes sense. Like, I haven't been able to train endurance. My shoulders have been janky and like weird and all that stuff. So it's completely sensible. But when I started to think like, okay, but what I've been doing for the last couple of months is to try to do my regular practice where I've been trying to run through my one arm positions, and I've taken for granted that that my body was where it was at, and when I then see that, okay, but yeah, I actually struggle with these very basic holds for time. It's something I'll need to rebuild, because like it's going to be tough for me to do long sequences of complex one arms if I struggle with basic ones. But it was literally a mistake. Like I hadn't noticed that like my capacity in this regard had fallen significantly. And I was trying to challenge the body with the too complex task for what it was currently able to deal with the shoulders. So it's a very clear example of the same thing. I was trying to highly technically challenge myself on the things that I'm used to doing, but I hadn't noticed that like a very significant capacity had been very reduced, because like I would feel that my shoulders would wobble out and be weird all the time, but I hadn't considered just the fact that like, okay, now when like the shoulders feel reasonably stable in the normal stuff and like rotator cuff exercises feel good, that doesn't immediately equate to the fact of being effective at solving this complicated task of standing on one arm, just because I've been able to do it for 10 years. The conditioning is specific. It's now at a lower level and it needs to be rebuilt. So yeah, just an example of exactly the same principle as I'd tell someone who literally are afraid to get into a wall handstand applies to me, just in a different context.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. It's like I think a good mistake or a good conceptual mistake occurs at all levels of training, just in a different manifestation. So, yeah, that's a really good one. So, where do I want to go next? Yeah, I kind of want to actually talk about more technical mistakes as well, just in terms of cueing.
Yeah, it's kind of important. We've just been like rambling around that.
Yeah, basically. I kind of want to talk about body positioning. I suppose we'll kind of run through the whole body positioning of handstand. So I suppose we've done hands last week and hand spacing, or was it the week before? We'll just we'll strike last week's episode off the list of episodes that didn't happen. But yeah, so we've done hands over the whole episode now. We've done everything kind of that, but I think it's kind of the mistake. I suppose if we start at elbows, it's one of those ones we always get this idea of like what direction should the elbows face? How much internal and external rotation of the forearm should we have? Is there actually a set way? And this is kind of one of those ones like, should my elbows be fully locked? And this kind of like, there's a mistake you get a lot in coaching, like the elbows have to look this way, they have to face that way. They don't. There's always kind of a variance in the way the elbows will be positioned. We've obviously talked about cubital valgus because we were on a kick of that for quite a while. But there is that. There's hyperextension in the elbows, degree of hyperextension. There's, rotation, which direction the elbow pit faces. All of these things are important, but to ascribe that one person has to have one specific elbow shape and one specific elbow form, there is only one true form, would be a classic mistake. I think the mistakes that we basically go is that there is one true position for everything and there's not variance. So I think that's kind of the classic mistake of everyone must be the same. When let's just face it.
Yeah, and like just to go off of from that one, like technical mistake. If you want to do a straight arm handstand, then doing a bent arm handstand is a mistake. Whereas it's important here to have the distinction. That is a mistake you don't want to make because you want to at least be attempting to do the straight arm handstand, then, right? But if you look at a mistake which is kind of common actually and not necessarily that bad, is let's say you're doing a straight arm handstand, but occasionally you adjust by these tiny micro bends of the elbow. Some people do that, and that is kind of their preferred method of dealing with underbalance. And it's not necessarily like the worst thing in the world. Like, as long as you're able to do that effectively without like significantly breaking your form, it's not going to mess much with your balance and with your form. So is it better, yes or no, in terms of like not using a microbend to balance? It's very hard to say. I know people that like if you'd force them to not microbend to catch underbalance, they would just not be a professional hand balancer. And we're talking like performance level people. And for me, it's not my preferred way. Like for me, it's very uncomfortable and unintuitive to bend arms. But for example, the guy I train with every day in circus school, he's really, really good. When he would jump up on canes, he would also always kind of like finish the last part by like having like a little bend and then straighten. And he is like he can press perfectly and all that. It's just like his preferred learned method of action right there was a small bend. So that is something that is more kind of within the range of variation rather than mistake, whereas kind of like the not having attention on straightening your arms, that's a mistake, I would say.
Yeah, then it's also like we do have to put in context. We're always like, we do hand balancing, we have this kind of focus on straight arms, but then we also do have to think like what's going to come afterwards, and that can also dictate which way the elbows are going. Are you cartwheeling with a handstand with the intent to come down to an air baby? Or are you doing capoeira? Let's face it, capoeira, you're not going to straighten your arms. So, there's always context for this as well. But it is this idea, like particularly the one we've encountered a lot, like cubital valgus is quite common. It's much more common. Now we started looking for it and screening it. It's much more common than you think. And then there's always this idea of like straighten your elbows to someone who just like their elbows are straight and locked. And I even got caught out by this one recently with one of my clients who was like, he's got, pretty good, he's come along a lot over the last year or so, but I was constantly like, his elbow just wasn't locked. It just looked slightly bent. And I was like, lock your elbows. And then it kind of, he was doing it, and then it was looking better. I was like, there's always a bit more there. Then it just turned out, no, that was actually his terminal elbow extension. And I was just not, from whatever elbow angle I'd assessed it or hadn't given enough visual assessment. It looked straighter from one angle, but then in the angle he was sending me was one arms, it didn't look straight enough. And I was like, maybe it was, I remember seeing it straighter. Maybe it was just this thing of cueing visually wrong. But then eventually, like, he just was like, I can't get it. I was like, hold on. So I just done another assessment. I was like, oh, wait. No, this is elbow locked. Okay, continue. It just looks slightly bent. Not a problem. And then I was like, well, do you want to stretch your elbows? We we could do that, or do you want to leave them alone? And he just chose to leave them alone. But, you know, he holds 20, 30-second one arms now on them, so no problem.
Mm.
So, yeah, it's
Yeah,
kind of
I mean,
elbows.
yeah. There's I mean, I guess we can keep moving up the body.
Yeah,
And yeah, shoulders, of course. The big thing that we like to talk about, like loads of different things there. Uh, and yeah, there you have like the various kind of positionings of like shoulder over hand, which is what we tend to speak about as kind of the default. And then you have kind of closed shoulders in terms of like going into more of a planche domain or an arch handstand, or you arch by going too open, which ends up in sort of a Mexican alignment. And these have their purposes, but if we are to speak about the default, which is for the context of conversation a good thing to do, having this kind of shoulder over hand, shoulder elevated position is something to strive for, since it allows the effective learning of a lot of the vocabulary, and it gives you kind of that baseline placement where you are in the middle. You from there you can go to planche, you can go to handstand push-up, you can go to Mexican, you can go to one arm, you can go to press, and so on. So it makes sense that this is the de facto kind of most used position by most people at this point in time, and like in relation to kind of the old school methodology and stuff, like it is sensible that the handstand kind of general training has gone towards this. So here I'd say like it's very much up to what you're doing, but again, if we speak about this type of the default as the straight handstand, then I think you want to try to elevate the shoulders to a good degree, like and I think like a quite normal issue here is like this kind of extreme push, like that you have learned that like you must push so fucking hard that you just crank the shoulders as high as you can until it's just painful, and this is a mistake. However, if you're completely new on your hands, like you're not strong yet, like it is going to feel heavy to do this, and then it might be just be closer to your like what's it called, the perceived rate of exhaustion.
Yeah, rate of perceived effort.
Yeah, rate of perceived effort, exactly. And that's something you need to factor in. Like if you're new, yes, it's going to be heavy. Go to the point where it's heavy enough so you can work, but don't kill yourself in the beginning. Allow yourself to build capacity and so on. But you want to try to elevate your shoulders, because it is on average the kind of thing which will give the most bang for your buck in this type of position. Since it's a simple cue to understand, you lift the shoulders, you feel the trapezius doing something. And it can be emulated by standing on your feet and like lifting the arms and so on. So it is something to kind of aspire for that default, and also look at the floor.
Look at the floor. I think one of the more common ones I want to deal with as well is the shoulders too open. Now, you had a really good post on your Instagram recently of just showing the different shoulder positions and then seeing how it affects what happens upstream. And that's always kind of interesting to me, because it's one of the ones, I suppose I've told people more to close their shoulders in the last 2 years than I have to open their shoulders. It's just in terms of that, like open shoulders, like if someone just literally doesn't have the range, strength or capacity, it will develop through the correct selection of exercises. It's a functional capacity of your strength and your passive flexibility and your active flexibility in shoulder flexion. It develops. But people who have sufficient shoulder, it's because it's one of these cues. It's like squatting. There was like always this thing of squatting, like squat and put the weight back on your heels. Generally where this came from was because beginners, when learning the squat, would we have a habit of coming up on their toes, like a kind of sissy squat, is it? Or one of those ones? Or not sissy squat, whatever. Anyway, but then what you were, the essence of the cue was to try get the weight into the forefoot or the midfoot. Get the weight down so it's spread out evenly over the foot. But then it kind of extrapolated onto like keep the weight on your heels, where then people would be overemphasizing the backward drift of the hips to make sure that their big toes are off the ground. And it's this same idea with like shoulders open. It's like, oh, open your shoulders, open your shoulders. Someone whose shoulders don't have the capacity to go there, having the intent to get open and as elevated and well as they can is great. It will help develop the flexibility. But then taking that same quote and then extrapolating from the person it was intended to you who has sufficient shoulder flexion and strength, then it develops the over open function of the shoulders, and then it kind of looks like, oh, you're doing something weird in the hips to counterbalance. Open your shoulders more. Your shoulders aren't open enough. That kind of emphasis happens more than we think. But then when you close the shoulders, that's what actually gives the true verticality for some people. So
yeah, and it's also, of course, it's a tricky thing to contextualize, because a lot of people do lack they just basically do lack the shoulder mobility to even reach that position, and for them, then yes, you need to work on like the mobility of your shoulders specifically, no doubt about it. But in the context of a mistake, I do think that it's it's relevant to work up to the degree of shoulder flexion which makes it possible for you to, like, again, I think that the tuck handstand it's a good kind of measure for this, because it will show what your shoulders are capable of by demonstration. And you'll very often find that people with stiff shoulders, or like who lack the active range to in a handstand position, will struggle to do the tuck. Like, either the shoulders will significantly start to close and like move towards a planche when they start tucking, or they'll have to kind of force themselves into kind of a Mexican type of alignment to tuck.
yeah,
And using this to calibrate and understand, okay, like, you want to be able to move the shoulders as less as possible, moving down into the tuck, and that might take some time to develop. And like, if we maybe if like we move even further up the body, like, this is also where like then in the entire midsection core hip thing, the mistake there is, of course, one more of understanding most of the time that its position will be relative to what goes on underneath, just from a pure concept of architecture. It will be relatable to what goes on underneath, and it will never be separate from what is underneath. It'll only move in degrees depending on what happens under, and that's the shoulder joint is the primary moving one. And when we speak shoulder joint here, I don't mean only the glenohumeral joint, but the entire scapula and the way the torso and the arm relates in this particular position.
It's always that kind of, for me, I always kind of mentally have an image of like the top 4 ribs and the shoulder are all kind of intimately related, and then beneath that is kind of separate. It's not an exact model, but it's very helpful for seeing what's going on. And it's that kind of it's that idea of like, if you're trying to teach someone a straight handstand and the ribs are flaring out, particularly from below T4, T7 kind of area, generally the rule of thumb is they're just not flexible enough. Like, if you've done an assessment, like with shoulder mobility assessment on YouTube or something like this, it's a good field test, and you go, oh, so you're telling someone, like, to maintain the arms vertical with the ground, you're telling them to pull their ribs down, but they're literally, if they pull their ribs down, they'll pull themselves off balance.
Yep.
Because you see this a lot in, like, if people are familiar with military pressing in fitness industry and stuff like this, a lot of people just don't have the capacity to get into 100%, 180 degree flex shoulder position. But then the compensation is like, oh, they go, well, your vertical position of the arms is really related to your T-spine extension. So if you extend your T-spine, you can get the hands up overhead and everything is a bit more stacked. Cool. But then if we extrapolate that position where there's kind of like a slight curving or arching to the body, then it's the exact same thing what kind of happens in an arched handstand. Whereas if we had someone who had better, more flexible shoulders, like in terms of shoulder flexion and range of motion that way, then they wouldn't need this T-spine extension to get over. So this is what's kind of happening in our arched handstand. It's like telling the common mistakes of coaching is to tell someone who does not have the range of motion required, either passive or active, generally passive, to pull the ribs down when it's a shoulder problem causing the ribs to flare out. It's a symptom of a cause or a cause of an effect or something like that. So that kind of idea is like, oh, know, as a coach, know what the capacity of someone is. So when you cue them, you don't give them a generic cue. You give them a cue that is actually achievable. Because it's one of those, like, I fucking definitely guilty of this mistake so many years ago. Like, pull your ribs down, straighten out. And it's like, well, actually, once I understood a bit more about flexibility and all this kind of how it's all interrelated, it's like, oh, the person literally does not have the capacity to do the cue. So you give them an
Yeah.
impossible task.
Yeah.
So,
Definitely a true one. And I thought that like it could definitely be interesting to move on from just like the regular handstand into, yeah, like I briefly mentioned presses before. Like, yeah, if you are significantly bending your arms, that will be a an issue, and you might want to consider moving into easier drills where you can move more, as in a straight arm press to handstand. Same with leaning too much forwards in the shoulders. Again, like working on drills from top down, where you can start in the stacked position and then like it will break when it needs to break, but at least you are working on kind of the elevation power rather than just like front delt action.
yeah.
And obviously, like if you do not have a good pancake and you want to work on pressing, well, you're just making the task a lot easier for yourself by developing a good pancake as well. So like you have zero
Yeah.
excuses for not working on your pancake if you want the press. It's just going to make the road there a lot easier.
Yeah,
And
it's also just like it is that kind of thing. Of like I do think people they have too much of the pancake and too much of the flexibility intertwined as a needed thing. Where let's say you come in and you go, okay, I'm just ready to start training press. You can work on the shoulder flexion strength as a kind of separate entity to the flexibility and
yeah,
raise them at the same time. These are definitely things that can be worked on, and then hopefully they'll coincide. But it is that kind of thing of like, oh, the stronger, like, as you kind of demonstrate when I make you do this, like, when you come in tight, like Mikael comes in tight, he's one of these people who's not super flexible in the morning. And I remember at one of the retreats we done, I made you like start doing shoulder presses completely unwarmed up, just to demo.
yeah, yeah.
One of the
It's
thing is like,
miserable,
oh,
but it's possible.
yeah, but like you have 45 degrees of forward lean on the pancake, and then your active flexibility matches at basically 100%, and then you have shoulder flexion strength, so you're able to compensate for the lack of flexibility or the lack of like not chest to floor, but you can just do stolers in that position quite easy, quite a lot of them. So that is definitely one of the things is like, oh, once again, overemphasize on a physical quantity that might not be an exact transference, just as an idea, just to think about. And also just because you can separate the flexibility, like the Gollum press as well. Just like, oh, we can just bend things and we can develop strength. Oh, and as it comes, oh, we'll get it. So there is a case there for like bent leg to pike presses,
Yeah,
bent, tuck presses and stuff like this.
yeah. And I think that like, I mean, if we like, the further you move into kind of like complex material, the more kind of detail mistakes there become also on the methodological side, and it becomes but and it also becomes like more individual in terms of like how the body will respond to various things. And I think yeah, it's also we've talked about before, like on the methodological side, that like a mistake in terms of assumption is that a quote unquote good technique performed skill will look the same for each person. And from my experience, like the easier the skill is, the more similar it becomes, because like when you're very good at it, you can perform it in a myriad of ways. Whereas things that are on high technical complexity, like let us just take like for example a one arm press to handstand or something stupid like that, which is just
Yeah.
which takes a lot of training, and like most importantly it uses a ton of different angles, a ton of different there's a lot of stuff going on, which means that the joints are traveling through very specific ranges. There's a lot of flexibility, a lot of basically also talent components coming into the mix, because it's on such like a level of difficulty. So then you will start seeing like there's going to be like significant variation, of course, within a reasonably limited space, of course, and like the differences will perhaps look more like subtleties because everyone that does them are on high level. But however, like there comes into like a myriad of various details more on those levels, whereas on more basic stuff, it's like most people you can get to with some training do a chest to wall handstand that looks very similar to each other, whereas you'll see, for example, on one arm flags you'll start seeing drastical differences just in terms of side bending and shoulder positionings and so on, just because like, hey, we're asking the body to do a very complicated thing, and like with the assumption that the bodies are not one-to-one replicas, then they will prefer certain specific ways of moving instead. And yeah, like I mean, if we move towards more complicated areas, such as like one arm handstands, I think the biggest kind of mistake there is obviously underestimating how hard it is and how long time it usually takes to learn it. And I think
my handstand in 2 months.
Yeah, like I've had many clients who've been like, oh yeah, but I heard this guy learned it in 6 months. I'm gonna show you. Oh yeah. And what did he show me after 6 months? And like, oh, 3 months passed by. I was like, yeah, where's your videos for this week? Yeah, my wrists are not feeling good. Oh, I could have told you so. 3 months ago, I already did tell you so. And then you'd never heard from the guy again. So it's that is certainly one.
Yeah.
And yeah, just like not having built up the solid general understanding of your body upside down in various angles, positions, and myriad of possibilities, so that you're robust on your hands. If you aren't, then it's just going to take you a lot longer. And like you don't want to be like you want your, I'm going to use a stupid metaphor, but you want your handstand roads to be wide and well paved. You don't want to be walking a tightrope when you're like walking going towards.
I like that. I like that. You want to pave your road on your handstand journey nice and wide. The yellow brick road of handstand depression.
Yes. So basically, what we're trying to do here is do what the Romans did. Build a glorious network. Okay, I'm going to shut the fuck up now.
I think that's definitely the number one mistake, or everything is the number one mistake, because let's face it, if you're making that mistake, it is the number one mistake at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, yes, making the mistake of basically, how to describe it? Yeah. Underestimating and overestimating the amount of time and consistency it takes to get some skills, the advanced skills. There is just like, particularly for one arm, there's just a process that people have to be brought through. And it just takes time. Like some people do get it quicker, and that's fantastic. But to use an outlier of like, this person got it without a solid assessment, like say the classic street workout guy or calisthenic guy who is a planche master and front lever master and is just a beast. They go, oh, this guy learned a one arm in this and he learned it that way. And I was like, well, are you a planche master? Are you a front lever master? Can you do 50 chin-ups with weight on you? Maybe you don't have the same capacities as this person. It's that kind of thing of extrapolating someone's rough results without a proper assessment of that person and a comparative analysis of yourself. Then it kind of gives you the picture. It's like, oh, this person learned one arm in 3 months, and they've done dance for a long time. They've done handstands for a very long time. They've only started focusing on one arm, and they have flexible in all the kind of ways and very good coordinative capacity. Then you go, oh, well, I can't touch my toes. Maybe you're not that person.
Yeah.
So it is that kind of thing. And it is always that thing of just like looking at the variance in training response as well. It's just like there is a variance in training response. Over a long period of time, most people will kind of tend towards an average level. And there is kind of like, but then there is peaks on that. People get faster. People get better at things faster. If they didn't, we wouldn't have the Olympics. Will we have the Olympics this year? Who knows? But yeah, it is that kind of thing of like, oh, you can't just go, someone learned X And it goes for anything. Someone got a 200 kg deadlift in 2 months, and he's 17. It's like, well, choose your parents better. Roll the dice for reincarnation next time better.
Basically.
Whereas there is kind of, on average, there is an on average thing, and generally the goal is to hope and pray and whatever you want to do that way, that you are not on average and things come quicker in your chosen activity. But most likely on average you are average, and that is okay.
Yep.
Assuming you are exceptional is a big mistake. Assuming you're not average.
It's and as you said, this becomes more relevant, like the further on we go with it, really. But summing up kind of a lot of these things, yes, like we could say a lot about, when you do one arm, just like people don't shift their hips diagonally enough. This we've talked about before, and I urge you, like, in case you wonder more kind of very specific details on the exact kind of breakdown on the skills, we do have a bunch of like episodes on the various things, so look through that if you want. But I think that, like, the more I think about this now when we're discussing it, I do see that, I guess the most interesting, at least to me, the most interesting kind of mistakes are methodological, because that is something that you can turn into principles to some degree or other, at least. And a lot of them just have to do with very basic things, such as patience. Like, make sure that you're ready for the thing that you want to do. Like, make sure you rest enough before you're going to do the next set, so that, like, you're... Like, because you can't know if you're going to manage the thing on the next set, but what you can do is you can set the boundary conditions with which you go into the next set. Like, okay, am I fresh? Am I ready? Okay, well, if I am, then I'm going to try. If I'm not, then I might wait a bit more, unless I'm doing like a very specific like endurance or strength workout. So these types of things are important, and I think that also in relation to all of this, like, understanding what kind of practitioner you are will be effective, because we do start developing our habits and our ways of working, and sometimes it might be good to try to break out of those or see what happens if you change things up, because you might not always be doing the smartest things for yourself. So it's both in the technical realm of, like, you must do this and not this, but I think it's larger on the kind of principle side of things. And as a side note to that, another big mistake is to think that there is just this one narrow path that you must follow because that's what someone said. If you find examples of the other, or of something that of the opposite, like, by definition, what the belief cannot be an axiom, because it exists an opposite of it. And you see this, this person just does some weird, strange shit, but they can do it. Oh, well, okay, it might mean that it is it's a variation, it's a thing that can be done, and then you can make your choices based on an informed opinion.
Yeah, that's good. I think we're going to wrap it up there for today.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go. Common mistakes that you're probably making, or that common mistakes we've made so many times in the past that we've realized we're actually making mistakes, and now shared with you.
Yes.
Right. Other than that, thank you for listening. I do have a request. If you have gotten this far into the podcast, it means you must like us. And if you like us, I'd really appreciate it if anyone out there, could go and drop us a review or a rating on whatever podcast app you're using. We're doing really well on the ratings. I'm immense that people are so popular. Number one podcast in a lot of countries recently on fitness in the smaller countries. So, that's pretty damn good. But if you rate us, we could be more popular and therefore less special. I can't remember. So now, but yeah, if you can, that would be awesome. I'd really appreciate that. Other than that, yes, please rate us. It's been like my latest thing, we're at number 140 in the States. Oh no, we're 250, blah. Anyway, this is how I occupy my time. Anyway, thank you all for listening. To our listeners in Panama, we were top podcasts in a while. Thank you so much. Same with Bulgaria. So share it with you guys. Other than that, I'm going to stop rambling and hit the outro music.
The Handstandcast is brought to you by Handstand Factory and is produced by Motion Impulse. Thanks for tuning in. You can find a full transcript of each episode along with the show notes and any relevant references on handstandfactory.com/podcast. Thanks to Isaac for editing and Jordan for transcriptions. Music by Daniel Horwath. If you want to support the show, you can buy us a coffee on buymeacoffee.com or consider starting one of our Handstand Factory online programs. Links are in the show notes.